What's really important is how much water we're putting on at each application. So the goal is for most of our crops to about an inch of water per week. And the reason that number comes to play is an inch of water is what it takes to soak the average kind of clay content Kansas soil a depth to 6 to 8 inches, because that's where the vast majority of our root systems are going to be on our tomato plants, on our flowers, on our lawn. And if we can get that soaked to an inch, then that's going to give that root system a good supply of water to get it through for almost probably a week, depending on conditions.
Whether you have an irrigation system or water your lawn and home landscape with hoses and portable sprinklers, you can reduce water use by following a few simple water-saving steps. On today's Sound Living, water conservation in the home landscape. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State Research and Extension horticulture agent for Johnson County, Dennis Patton, says that a well-designed landscape and watering efficiently, slow, infrequent deep watering will conserve water and lower your water bill. Dennis, I would imagine we're kind of reaching that point where you're getting a lot of questions about not only watering, but how do I water efficiently and effectively in my home landscape? And really, it starts with having a good design, doesn't it?
That's correct, yes. As we've kind of quickly gone, hot and dry, the need for irrigation supplemental watering has definitely come into play. And, with water costs today throughout the state and then also water availability, people are concerned. I think most people want to make sure they do it effectively, efficiently to save water, but also save them money.
I think one of the things I saw was really about 50% of the water we use in the household goes for outdoor areas and landscaping.
That's correct. I've even seen some statistics that say it's a little bit higher, the amount of water used during the summer months for lawn and landscape compared to that indoors. But still, it is a great increase when we do start watering. And here again, it's all about efficiency, so we get the biggest bang for our buck with every droplet of water.
A lot of the time, the landscape we have is just what came with the house we bought, but that doesn't mean that we can't make some adjustments and some alterations.
Right. I think, water conservation starts just with a plan, thinking through things. No one's saying you can't have plants in your landscape that are more water requiring. It doesn't say everything has to be, what we call xeriscape, which is low-maintenance landscaping. That's not zero-scape, it's just xeriscape. And one of the founding principles of that concept is that we group plants together by their water needs. So for watering an area, we group all our plants that like a little bit more moisture together. We put those that may not need water together, and that just makes it more efficient in how we water. We think about our lawns, we think about our flowers, and vegetable gardens. A lot of people have vegetables. Those are all going to be fairly high water use plants. But a lot of our trees and shrubs are pretty darn drought tolerant, durable here in our Kansas extremes.
And that is nice when you can work in those native plants.
That's correct. That's one of the biggest trends are more native plants because they are more adapted. They have deeper root systems and can roll with the punches of drier weather and our soils. So, yeah, that's another reason the jump on the native plant bandwagon is just the more efficient water use.
The real key, though, here is not only how we water, but how much we're watering, how often we're watering, the type of system that we're using. So let's jump into some of that because you were telling me earlier that time does not equal volume.
That's correct. I love the question we get all the time. Well, I'm watering my garden, my lawn for 20 minutes and I'm putting enough water on. And when it comes to watering, whether it's a sprinkler system or you're putting a sprinkler head out in your garden, your portable system, as we call it, the hose dragger, the amount of time only tells us how long we're running the water. What's really important is how much water we're putting on at each application. So the goal is for most of our crops to about an inch of water per week. And the reason that number comes to play is an inch of water is what it takes to soak the average kind of clay content Kansas soil a depth to 6 to 8 inches, because that's where the vast majority of our root systems are going to be on our tomato plants, on our flowers, on our lawn. And if we can get that soaked to an inch, then that's going to give that root system a good supply of water to get it through for almost probably a week, depending on conditions. And so that's where you sometimes hear, turn your sprinkler on for an hour, 30 minutes, whatever, set some rain gauges, straight-sided cans into the sprinkler pattern. And you may want to do a couple because the patterns can kind of vary. and then kind of take a measure. And then in an hour you're putting on a half an inch of water. So if you want an inch, you need to run the system for 2 hours or whatever it might be. Time doesn't really tell us anything unless we know the volume output of the system you're using.
And sometimes the sprinkler is not the right choice because if you've got a big tree in the middle of the lawn, a lot of the leaves and branches are going to really keep that water from hitting the ground.
That's correct. When you think about all the different sprinkler heads types out there, there's two things to me you need to look for. One is you want a sprinkler head that's going to place the water closer to the soil surface, because those sprinkler systems that throw the water 5-10 feet up in the air, you get with the Kansas wind a lot of distortion of the pattern. You get more evaporation before the water hits the ground. And the other thing I think you're looking for a more efficient sprinkler head is something that puts out a large drop of water. If it turns into a mist or a fine, here again you have more wind distortion of the pattern, you have more evaporation. So sometimes a really large droplet of water closer to the ground is going to be the ideal sprinkler head to have more efficiency.
The drip irrigation, that works as well?
That's correct. And that's, I think, really the philosophy behind drip. You're putting the water right on the soil, so there's little evaporation, no wind distortion. You're putting it right at the root system. And there's varying different types of drip systems out there. I think drip system would work really well for the typical, rowed out vegetable garden, because you use what they call the drip tape right at the base. I think where people struggle on drip systems is even more on how much water is being applied, because here again, you don't have that sprinkler pattern that you can put the rain gauge in. You can put a can underneath a drip tape or a drip emitter and then measure the output of water and kind of convert that to inches, which is a lot easier for people to do with drip systems.
Also, when we're talking about the lawn being right up against a hardscape like the driveway, I've seen sometimes they say if you can do some landscaping in there to where the grass is not right up against the driveway, that helps, because 9 times out of 10 when you're watering, a lot of that water is going onto the driveway.
That's correct. I think that's just part of really just managing whatever system you use, whether it's an in-ground system or you're dragging hoses. You want to apply it directly to the lawn, to the soil, not to the driveways. So yeah, if you can do a buffer strip maybe along the walkway, or just really carefully set your sprinkler patterns so you're not having that runoff. And of course, the other thing is, if you're over applying the water and if you're applying it faster than the soil can take it up, it's also going to run off itself. So I think that's just part of being a good steward of the water. We haven't really talked about this, but also a lot of times, you got leaks and drips from the faucet. You need to replace the washing in your hose, those type of things. That's all inefficient watering. But you're right. If there's ways you can prevent that from getting onto hard surfaces so every drop counts, I think is, here again, a good strategy to help conserve that water and make sure it gets to the plants.
The in-ground irrigation systems are becoming more popular, but I imagine that they probably require just as much maintenance and just as much oversight while watering as using the garden hose.
I agree. I think the irrigation system is a convenience. The problem, though, it does require more maintenance. It does require work. You got to make sure you get things consistently, because what happens a lot of time in in-ground systems is various people work on it, and then different heads start getting applied. So that's putting out uneven amount of water in a zone. The advantage to the portable system, the hose dragger system, which I'm one of those people, is you're probably going to keep a little bit more eye on that system, where you're going to place it, check for leaks, those type of things, because you're out there maneuvering it, moving it around. So to me, they both accomplish the same thing. It's just more or less the convenience. And of course, then usually people do apply more water with an in-ground system because it's so convenient to set the clock and kind of forget it, when you got to be physically there to turn the hose on and off. Sometimes you're a little bit more judicious about how much water you use.
If you could, Dennis, walk me through how you do your lawn, because I think sometimes we get confused in regard to, do I have to do everything all in one day? Do I have a pattern that I'm supposed to follow? What makes the most sense in terms of how I'm moving the hoses around? So tell me what you do.
That's a really good question. For my lawn myself, we haven't really talked about lawn strategies, but most of my lawn I let go somewhat dormant. I don't require a nice green lawn all summer long. So I'll go back to maybe watering my lawn maybe once every 2 to 3 weeks, just enough to keep it alive and hydrated. But my flowers, my vegetables, I water them on a weekly basis. And I, here again, have followed my own advice. I have some sprinkler heads. I've set the rain gauge in them. I know what my output is. I know how long I have to run the system. And I personally try to get on that inch of water at one time, and I just try to water once a week or so. And the other thing we haven't talked about is we all have our best watering gauge built in, and that is our eyes and our fingers. Dig down in the soil. Is it wet? Is it dry? If it's dry, if the plants are wilting, water. If you dig down, it's still moist, delay watering. I think sometimes we want to use time clocks, automatic things, and get on a schedule. And with watering, to me, it's just monitoring the outdoor conditions, the temperatures, the wind speed, looking at the plants, knowing the plants, and then applying that water when I need it. I try to go on the lean side. I don't want to pay a high water bill. I'd rather do other things. So that's kind of how I manage it. I try to get it down to about once a week, the water on those high maintenance areas. And here again, if we had our ideals, we'd water early in the morning, lower wind speeds, cooler temperature. But there's nothing wrong with watering during the heat of the day. It's not going to burn the plants. It's just we have higher evaporation. The big problem is probably watering later in the evening, especially our fruits and vegetables, where we could have more disease issues by that prolonged wetness. So I think you have to just figure out what works for you. Sometimes you have to bend the rules a little bit, but as long as you understand how you're bending the rules, I think it still works.
Mulch also will extend the moisture level, but we've got to make sure we're doing the mulch right, too.
Correct. Mulch is a great tool to keep the soil cooler. It keeps the heat reflected off the sunlight so you don't have as much evaporation. So yeah, flower gardens, vegetable gardens, definitely, 2 to 3 inches of a mulch. It doesn't really matter whether you use grass clippings, shredded leaves, if you're in wheat country, use wheat straw, whatever it might be, or you buy bags of mulch from the store. They all basically do the same thing as far as keep the soil cooler, conserve the moisture, increase root growth, development, suppress weeds. But it's really what it looks like that's important to you and how much you want to spend on it.
You mentioned weeds, and that's another important element, is to make sure that things that don't need water aren't getting water.
That's correct. Yeah, weeds are probably the biggest suck of moisture. That's why they're a weed. They outcompete our desirable plants. So yeah, anything you can do to suppress weed growth, that's going to allow more water to go to your desirable plants.
We might often see water restrictions implemented in whatever city we happen to live in, and I've kind of been reading that when that occurs, you really want to focus on your trees and shrubs.
That's correct. If we get into water restrictions, then you have to kind of prioritize, and of course the first would be young trees and shrubs because those are kind of foundation long-term plants. Annual plants like flowers, you can always plant those the next year. Vegetable gardens would probably come back higher on the hierarchy of watering because that's a food supply. Lawns, honestly, would probably be low on the totem pole because they are replaceable, and a lot of them will go dormant with dry weather, but they'll come back when we get cooler weather and rain.
And for a number of reasons, we do want to make sure that we're reducing runoff and soil erosion.
Yeah, I think here again, every drop that ends up on a hard surface or in the gutter is just wasted water. It's not doing your plants any good. And so, yes, monitor the system. Make sure you repair all your leaks from the hoses, from the hydrants, from the faucets. And then, when you set a sprinkler pattern, make sure that you're getting it on the target, not off target.
I like the fact that you mentioned measuring how much water is really going on to the lawn so that you know how long to leave those systems on, and really just making sure that we're not doing this so frequently that we're really harming the lawn and the trees by not letting that water really soak in.
That's right. I think the worst thing we can do is the light, frequent watering, or, jokingly sometimes call people the beer can waters, where they go out there and they just put the hose on for a second here, a second there, and they move on, or they turn that sprinkler on for 15, 20 minutes, and it just basically all evaporates. It doesn't really get down into the soil. Here again, our goal is that inch or so of water per week, that we're really deeply soaking that soil 6 to 8 inches deep, and that's going to give our plants the best chance to cope with hot and dry weather.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Johnson County, Dennis Patton. To learn more about water conservation in the home landscape, visit the online K-State Research and Extension bookstore, bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu, or contact the county or district extension office in your area. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.